Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. I was halfway through a run from a warehouse in Van Nuys to a repair shop in Westwood when everything stopped making sense. It was a hot Friday, about 4:35 p.m., the digital thermometer in the dash reading 96 degrees Fahrenheit. I was in my delivery van, a high-roof panel model with a sliding side door and a cargo area lined with plywood and D-rings for tie-down straps. I'd done this route 100 times. Take the 101 south, merge onto the 405, cut across near the Sepulveda Pass when it was not completely packed. Traffic is never good in Los Angeles, but that day it wasn't simply slow. It was locked. Brake lights stretched in front of me like a red wall, and when I pulled up the navigation app, every freeway in the county was red or black. The map was a bloodshot eye. I kept the radio on a talk station because it was the only thing that kept my focus when the van crept a few feet every minute. At 4:42 p.m., the broadcast cut into a shrill tone that made my teeth ache, followed by a voice that was too calm to be a normal radio host. It identified itself as an emergency message for Los Angeles County. The wording danced around what was happening: significant civil disturbances, unusual assaults, hospitals overwhelmed, law enforcement requesting residents to remain where they were and avoid large crowds. It didn't mention any disease. It did not say the word that everyone would begin saying an hour later. All it did was tell people to stop moving. In Los Angeles, telling people to stop moving is like telling the ocean to stop waves. It just made us more nervous. Around 4:55 p.m., I was on the 405 near Sherman Oaks, hemmed in by a pickup with a ladder rack on my left and a silver sedan with a family of 5 on my right. A helicopter pounded the air above the Ventura Boulevard overpass. Ahead of me, a white compact car twitched forward and then swerved. The driver's door opened while it was still rolling. The car kissed the median barrier, bounced, and drifted across 2 lanes. Through the rear window, I saw the driver's head snap forward like he was falling asleep at the wheel. The car came to rest sideways and blocked the lane. 2 people hopped out of their vehicles and sprinted toward the compact, yelling that they would help push it aside. In the side mirror, I counted more people getting out, shoulders tensed, looking for a reason to do something because in a city of engines there is nothing worse than being trapped inside one. Then, someone screamed. It started as the sound of pain and dropped into something else. The compact car's driver tipped over the threshold between a person who needs help and a threat you can't process. The 2 Good Samaritans who reached him stepped back fast, and one of them stumbled against a motorcycle that had been weaving the shoulder. That's when more people started to get out of their cars, and I made the worst and best decision at the same time. I shut the van off, pocketed the keys, and stepped into the heat with my reflective safety vest on because it made other drivers see me as a worker rather than a stranger. It was reflex from years of deliveries and roadside tire changes. I took my heavy flashlight out of the door pocket. It was a metal-bodied model with a wide head, not a tactical accessory, just a tool that could take a drop and still work. The first person I saw up close who was wrong was a man in his 60s wearing a polo shirt and golf cap. His eyes were glassy, like he had a fever. The right sleeve of his shirt was ripped. He stumbled along the shoulder, knocking his hip into a guardrail hard enough to leave a smear. People tried to help and then reconsidered. He fell to one knee, stood again, and then lunged at a young woman without any warning. He didn't look angry. That was the worst part. He looked empty and fast. 2 men pulled him off. One shouted that the man had bitten him, and I remember hearing the word bite and not processing it. People push and swing and throw punches in traffic, but they don't bite. I would have told you that 5 minutes earlier. At 5:07 p.m., a California Highway Patrol cruiser rolled up the shoulder with its emergency lights on. The public calls them CHP, but I try to say the full name once because people drown in abbreviations when things go bad. 2 officers got out. They were calm and loud, with practiced traffic control voices that could cut through engine noise. They told people to get back into their cars and stay inside. They ordered anyone with an injury to sit on the shoulder and keep pressure on it. They cleared a small space in front of the white compact car, then waved a tow truck forward that had somehow threaded through the mess. The truck tried to hook the compact, but the crowd pressed close, and one officer had to push people back with both hands up, saying, we'll move it, you need to step away." The second officer wasn't quick enough. A person who shouldn't have been moving that fast came out of the cluster and grabbed for the officer's collar. The officer reacted with training, one hand up, the other going for the radio mic, and the person did the same head-down lunge I had already seen once. The officer stumbled. The first officer drew his service pistol. I will not describe what happened next in a way that would violate any guidelines, but it was controlled and necessary and over in a few seconds. It was also the first time most of us had seen something like that up close, right next to cars with baby seats and shopping bags and gym gear in them. Everyone stopped. Then nobody stopped anything at all. The tone came back on the radio at 5:19 p.m., the kind that makes the hairs on your arms rise even when it's 96 degrees. The emergency voice told us the county was under quarantine and to shelter in place. I looked in every direction and saw 100 places to be trapped and not one place to be safe. At 5:27 p.m., a driver in a lifted truck shouted that the surface streets would be faster. He hammered the throttle and used the shoulder to pass 4 rows of cars. He made it to the Ventura Boulevard overpass where the lanes pinched in and then found the pathway blocked by a box truck sideways across the shoulder. He stopped, and the cars behind him who had followed his lead boxed themselves in. That's the thing about Los Angeles freeways. They make false promises. There are exits, but each one funnels into surface streets that are already choked. They are like the small tubes in a machine that are supposed to draw pressure away, but instead concentrate it. I decided to stop being a spectator. I went back to the van and grabbed the things I knew would matter. I took my work gloves, the tow strap, a flat pry bar, a folding utility knife with fresh blades, a compact first aid kit that was more than a decorative box, 2 quarts of bottled water, and a contractor trash bag. I clipped the flashlight to a belt loop and used a carabiner to keep it there. Then I slung the tow strap over my shoulder and stuffed the pry bar into the side pocket of my cargo pants. If this reads like a gear list, it is because gear lists are the difference between running blind and moving with a plan in a city that doesn't want you to move at all. I tried to talk to the nearest people with the voice I use when I have to get a refrigerator up a narrow stairwell. I asked if anyone had medical training, and 2 people said yes. One was a mechanic whose first aid was all job site classwork, solid and practical. The other was a woman who worked at a dental office and had a real sense for triage. A third person, a teenager about 15, asked if he could help, and I said yes, because giving people useful tasks is how you keep them calm. His mother hovered close to him, eyes snapping to every sound. I told the mechanic to help the CHP officers clear a lane. I gave the teenager and his mother water and told them to pick up loose objects off the roadway. We cleared 2 gas cans, 3 traffic cones, a broken car seat, and a box of glass jars that would have been a disaster in the dark. The air began to smell like burned rubber and a hint of brush smoke, the kind that tells you a small fire is turning into a bigger one. The San Fernando Valley has dry patches where ornamental shrubs run behind fences along freeways, and when a catalytic converter or a sparked bumper tow hitch throws heat into those shrubs, it doesn't take much to start a chain. Wind from passing cars usually knocks those small fires down. With traffic at a standstill, there was nothing to keep tiny flames from getting larger. By 5:45 p.m., we could see the glow of at least 2 fires ramping up a few hundred yards ahead, and a third one behind us to the south. Around 6:10 p.m., I saw shapes moving in the heat shimmer ahead. It wasn't just people walking, it was people stalking. A crowd that had been clustered around a minivan broke in the middle like an egg cracking, and 3 people came out of that cluster running in a straight line at narrow targets. The CHP officer shouted for everyone to get back into their cars. The mechanic next to me said the off-ramp to Sepulveda Boulevard was less than a quarter-mile ahead, and if we could reach it on foot, we could drop down to surface streets and maybe zigzag to Ventura Boulevard, then toward the river. It was not a perfect plan, but it was the only plan that meant not being trapped on bridge decking in a city that was starting to burn. I told the mother and her son to stay close and keep their hands free. The CHP officers were as pinned as we were, but one of them, a woman in her 30s with a steady tone, told anyone who was on foot to move in a single line along the right shoulder, keep quiet, and not engage with anyone who moved wrong or too fast. She said she would walk point. Her partner would cover the rear. She kept her service pistol holstered because she did not want people to panic at the sight of it. I remember respecting that in a way that felt strange given what was happening. We began to move. There were about 20 of us. The officer, her partner, the mechanic, the mother, and her son. A pair of college kids with day packs. 2 older men who argued about whether to take the next exit or the one after. A woman in a business skirt and running shoes who had changed out of heels. A delivery cyclist holding his bike by the top tube, and people who had decided that a line moving with intention was better than sitting and waiting for a rescue that might not come. We passed a man trying to start his car with jumper cables and offered him water. We passed 2 people arguing about whether to siphon fuel from a stopped pickup. We passed a bus whose driver kept the doors shut, eyes forward, knuckles white on the wheel as if the bus itself could protect the dozens inside as long as it stayed a bus. As we neared the Sepulveda Boulevard exit, we saw the problem. The ramp was clogged with abandoned cars and a pileup at the bottom. People on the surface street were pushing back against the ramp, trying to get up because something worse was happening below. We heard that sound again. A chorus of bodies moving without speech, the scrape and shuffle of shoes dragged in odd patterns, and then the quick rush of feet when someone who had been slow a second ago made a decision and sprinted at a target. People don't sprint at random in groups, not with purpose like that. It wasn't a riot or a brawl. It was a wave with points on it. The lead officer made a new call. Maintenance catwalk, she said. Not code, just words. She pointed at the metal walkway mounted to the outside of the bridge railing, the one used by crews to inspect expansion joints and light fixtures. It was narrow, guarded by a thin handrail, and it led to the underside of the overpass where electrical conduits and drainage lines ran. If we could get under the bridge, we might find access to a stormwater tunnel. If we could reach a stormwater tunnel, we could avoid the crush on the ramp and pop up farther east. I had used a catwalk once before when a driver dropped a box of expensive clinical equipment off the side of a van near a bridge inspection site. I knew they were rated for workers and gear. I also knew they were never meant for a line of civilians moving in a panic. We made rules in 30 seconds. Move single file. Each person keeps one hand on the railing. No one runs. If someone slips, the person behind grabs the back of their belt and braces. The cyclist lifted his bike and carried it over his head like it weighed nothing because adrenaline makes objects lighter for a few minutes. The mechanic went second behind the officer so there would be someone who could fix fastenings or spot structural hazards without making anyone slow down to explain. We made it to the underside of the overpass. a concrete belly cool in the heat, covered with graffiti that felt like messages from a city that existed last week. The officer popped the cover off a service box with the flat part of my pry bar and found a maintenance key hanging inside. I don't know why it was there, but sometimes a city is kind because a worker had one good reason to leave a thing where someone else could use it later. She used the key to unlock a chain-link gate to a narrow passage next to a drainage pipe. We squeezed through, moving the group in 5-person segments so we could react if we met anyone coming the other way. The passage led to a shoulder-width ledge beside a stormwater channel lined with slick algae. It smelled like runoff and motor oil and wet leaves. We followed it for maybe 200 feet. The light changed from yellow to gray, the sound of the freeway dulled, and the roar of the city turned into a hush broken by distant shouts. We reached a grated opening covered with a hinged panel and a rusted padlock. The mechanic took the utility knife, popped a new blade in, and worked the blade along the lock's rubber cover to expose the shackle. He used my pry bar as a lever against the grate, and I used the toe strap wrapped around the lock body to twist. It didn't break because locks don't fail like they do in movies, but the weld at the hinge had rusted, and with 3 people pushing and 1 pulling, the hinge tore. The grate lifted enough for each person to pass one at a time. We came out in a culvert that fed toward the Los Angeles River's concrete channel. I had never been so grateful for a piece of infrastructure that people usually call ugly. The river was low and quiet. A long strip of concrete with a trickle of water down the center line and bike paths on the edges. Above us, sirens and horns formed a canopy of noise. Down in the channel, our footsteps and breath sounded too loud, so we cut the talking to hand signals and short sentences. The officer introduced herself by name, Martinez, and said her partner's name was Hill. She checked in on the mother, whose name was Erica, and her son, whose name was Jay. The mechanic was named Marco. I told them my name and my job because stranger becomes teammate faster when you put a label on what you bring. The college kids were Cass and Mina. The cyclist was Nate. The woman in running shoes was Selena. The 2 older men were Harold and Dennis, and their argument about exits had turned into a quiet cooperation where they carried small bags for other people who were tired. We had become a unit without voting on it. Our plan formed around a rumor we picked up from a garbled radio channel and 2 texts that someone in the group received before the network choked. The rumor said there might be evacuation trains leaving from Union Station downtown. The logic was that rail corridors were less likely to be blocked by abandoned cars, and the station was a central node connected to emergency operations planning. That didn't mean there would be trains or that we would get seats. It meant we had a target. In a city as spread out as Los Angeles, a target is hope. We moved along the river's edge, staying out of the open when there was a culvert or underpass we could use. We kept our shoes dry by stepping on raised concrete ridges, and we took a drink break every 20 minutes to make sure people didn't get heatsick. I kept an eye on the sky because smoke drifts change direction quickly when a fire makes its own wind, and I didn't want a sudden curtain of smoke to trap us in a low place. A helicopter passed overhead at 6:52 p.m., too low and too fast. It banked hard and vanished behind an apartment building, and a minute later we saw a plume of black smoke behind the building and heard shouts. We picked up the pace without talking about it. As we approached the part of the river near Griffith Park, we saw the hills glowing. The Hollywood sign was a silhouette with red behind it. The Wilshire corridor to the south flickered. Office towers become lanterns when interior sprinklers and emergency lights fight with firelight. The effect is beautiful from far away. Up close, it looks like a code error in a system that should be steady. We saw 2 police cruisers abandoned near an access road. One had its light bar still blinking. The other was dark. The front door of the dark one was open, and I caught sight of a medical kit on the passenger floor. Officer Martinez made a quick decision. She and I approached the car together. She announced herself like she would in a normal stop because she was not going to be the person who cut corners on procedure when 10 seconds of caution could save a life. No one answered. She took the kit, a reflective rescue blanket, and a roll of gauze. She also took a small metal lockbox from under the front seat. Inside was a pair of gloves, a single tourniquet, and a sealed nasal airway device. Everything else had already been used or removed. She kept the box because it fit her belt, and because a box is a way to keep things organized when pockets become chaos. We ran into trouble at a low underpass where a cluster of people had taken shelter. They were quiet and alert, which was good, but their alertness was focused on us, which was bad. Nervous people with no plan can become a danger even when they don't intend it. One of them asked if we had food. Another asked where we were going. A third asked if we'd seen the National Guard and said he heard they were setting up a perimeter at the river near downtown. I told them we had a destination, that we had a medic, and that they could walk with us if they could keep silence and stay in single file. 2 of them joined us. The others stayed and looked like they regretted staying before we were out of earshot. We crossed under a rail bridge at 7:28 p.m. and heard the first real proof that the rumor might be accurate. The deep, slow horn of a train. It wasn't freight. The tone was different. It sounded like a passenger locomotive easing through a station. But when we climbed up to a vantage point on a low embankment and looked east, we saw that the tracks were blocked in at least one place by a truck that had jumped a crossing. If trains were moving, they were moving on selected routes, not free and open like regular service. It made sense. Nothing was regular anymore. We kept going. The light dropped as the sun pushed down behind the hills, and the smoke did the rest. The city's grid with its miles of sodium and LED street lamps had started to fail section by section. Power companies use switching yards and feeders that route electricity around problems, but switching power in a crisis is like trying to fix a bike while riding it. You can keep moving for a while. Then you can't. When the grid falls, it falls in patterns that make no sense to anyone who isn't in the control room. We watched whole blocks wink out. We saw a single gas station lit like a stage in the middle of a dark block. The whole intersection around it choking with cars trying to reach it. We gave it a wide berth, and yet at 8:12 p.m. we reached a flood control gate that forced us up to street level. We emerged near a small industrial yard and a cluster of warehouses with chain-link fences and razor wire. The air was cooler but filled with the clank of something metal beating on metal a few blocks away. We skirted it. On a loading dock, we passed a man arguing with his phone, trying to place a call and failing. He wanted to join us. We told him our rules and our destination. He said he needed to get to his parents in Highland Park. I told him we could not detour, and he understood because he looked at our small group and saw the cost of splitting it. We needed to cover 5 more miles in the dark. The closest safe corridor was the river, but it pinched around some bridges where we'd be visible from 100 yards away. Officer Hill suggested we take a utility right-of-way that paralleled the river for part of the distance. He had a map on his phone that worked even with no signal because he had downloaded the tiles. If I could tell everyone reading this one thing to do on a calm weekday, it would be to download offline maps of the places you live. You do not need reception to use what you already have saved. We cut past a broken fence behind a municipal maintenance yard. Inside, a worker had left a rolling tool chest half open. We did not loot. We looked for items that would keep people alive in a crisis without taking things others needed to survive in place. I took a roll of bright surveyor's tape. The mother, Erica, took a small pair of bolt cutters. Marco, the mechanic, took 2 hose clamps and a tube of sealant. Officer Martinez took a coil of nylon rope. The teenager, Jay, found a backpack with the reflective strips on it and used it to carry the extra water we found next to a hand-washing station. When we rejoined the river path, we had to cross through a section where the concrete sloped down at a steep angle to the trickle of water in the center. It was slick. We moved on our rear ends and heels. Halfway down, Nate the cyclist slipped. He kept hold of his bike with one hand and the rope with the other, and we used the rope to give him a stable point while two people pushed his bike up from below. At the bottom, he sat and breathed, then laughed a dry laugh that sounded like a pressure release. He said he was fine. He said he would never carry the bike like that again. At 9:03 p.m., we stopped in a shadow under a bridge to rest. I handed out small packets of crackers and a protein bar, the kind that tastes like a promise of food rather than food itself. We took turns drinking water. I used the flashlight with the beam pinched down to a narrow cone to check everyone's faces. You can see dehydration and panic in the eyes and around the corners of the mouth. We were holding together. I checked Officer Hill's arm because he had been knocked sideways by someone during the push off the freeway. The skin was scraped. It was not a bite. I cleaned it with saline from the kit and wrapped it with gauze because keeping small injuries clean the first night prevents big problems on the second. We pushed on. Someone ahead of us, out of sight, was moving along the river bottom. We could hear soft footfalls and a murmur like someone counting under their breath. Officer Martinez raised a hand and we all stopped. She called out in a clear voice without shouting. She used her name, her role, and the word safe. A figure stepped out into the glow of a distant fire. It was a man in a maintenance uniform with a city seal patch. He held a long-handled shovel like a staff. He had used duct tape to wrap the handle for grip. He said his name was Raul. He had been trying to clear a blocked culvert 2 hours earlier and then realized there would not be any more calls assigning him to culverts tonight. He asked where we were going. We told him. He joined us without discussion. With Raul came a knowledge of small shortcuts along the river. Narrow goat paths cut by taggers and joggers, low openings in fences, and a half-buried door he had used once to access a control space beneath a bridge. We took those options when they saved us a block and avoided sound. The air changed again near downtown. It smelled like hot concrete and diesel and something sharp from a chemical leak that was probably from a single warehouse with some solvents. We detoured around it without investigating. Curiosity is a luxury in a crisis. At 10:01 p.m., we heard another train horn. This time, it was closer and to our left. The tracks that feed Union Station are like fingers that gather to a palm. They curve and overlap and cross with metal shrieks and thuds. We climbed an embankment 3 at a time and peered through a chain-link fence. A passenger train sat at a platform about a half-mile away. Its windows glowed. The platform had people on it, not a crowd, more like a test pattern of bodies, spaced and still. A line of what looked like National Guard trucks idled in a lot nearby, but I could not be sure. The distance and the smoke made everything soft. The important part was that the train existed. The fence we needed to pass was topped with razor wire. The bolt cutters Erica had tucked into her pack were small, meant for padlocks and thin chain. Razor wire is a different job. We looked for a gate. We found one 100 yards down with a cut already made. Someone else had been here. The cut edges lay flat. We thought about what that meant and went through anyway. The path beyond the fence ran behind warehouses that had loading doors down to the tracks. We moved past roll-up doors with graffiti and past a stack of wooden pallets that would burn quick if a spark hit them. We cut through a small gap between two vents and came into a corridor that smelled like cardboard and metal dust. On the far side of that corridor was a broad sidewalk running between the rear of a parking structure and a cinder block wall. Beyond the wall, I could see the canopy lights of Union Station. It felt like the right thing to do. move quickly the last block, and get into the station where there were lights and people. It was not the right thing to do in that exact moment. The wrong thing that made it wrong had nothing to do with who was inside the station. It had to do with the overpass above us. It carried a street that fed traffic from the Arts District toward the station, and the sidewalks along it had emptied out into the overpass's understructure. People had tried to shelter from smoke there. Some had stopped moving for reasons I will not describe in detail. A few had become what we were avoiding. When we emerged from the corridor, a few of those saw us. We did not run. We turned as a group to face the problem, not because we wanted a confrontation, but because turning your back on something close is how you get separated. Officer Martinez moved to the front. She held her hands up like a traffic officer and used a voice that told drivers how to merge after a crash. Back up, slowly, everyone together. We did. The sound that followed us was the drag of shoes and a soft, keening noise that doesn't come from any emotion you can name in a normal day. We backed into the corridor, turned the corner, and took the long way around the block. We climbed a service ladder to the top of the parking structure because the stairs were crowded with people going down, and we did not want to be squeezed in a stairwell with panic rising. On the roof, the city looked like a patient with a fever. Patches of light and patches of dark. Smoke trails that bent and flattened depending on a wind we could not feel. We crossed the roof and found a ramp down to a lower level with an exit to a pedestrian bridge that led straight into the station's plaza. At the end of the bridge, a sheriff's deputy with a long gun, likely a patrol rifle, stood behind a temporary barrier, and a transit worker directed people to lines with tape on the ground. There were not many people, not like a normal late evening at Union Station. Those there had the weary, blank focus of travelers who had been awake too long. I saw no guardsmen at the entrance, but I saw two in the far corner near a staging area with medical staff and cots. We reached the barrier and stopped. A volunteer in a high-visibility vest asked if anyone was injured or ill. Officer Hill showed his bandaged arm. The volunteer examined it with quick hands and said it was a scrape. No one else claimed an injury. The volunteer asked if any of us had been in close contact with anyone who was visibly ill or aggressive within the last 2 hours. We told the truth, yes, near the freeway. The volunteer looked at a supervisor who looked at the sheriff's deputy, who looked at the group and made a call. You can wait in the outer plaza. You'll be screened again in 20 minutes. It was not a rejection. It was a practical line someone in a uniform had to draw because there were not enough seats and not enough trains. We moved into the plaza. The station's old Spanish Revival architecture made the plaza feel like a church courtyard built for endurance. The tile felt cool enough to sit. The fountain was off. The overhead speakers played nothing. A volunteer handed us bottles of water and pointed at a table with packaged meals. We took one each and made a circle. No one dug in immediately. That is the rule of tired people. They stare at food for a minute before eating. I looked around for signs of movement that did not belong. I saw a group of paramedics in yellow safety vests working quietly in the corner. I saw a man in a suit talking calmly on a satellite phone, one of the old ones with a big antenna. I saw two women with clipboards taking names. I saw a toddler asleep in a wagon. A station staffer announced that a train would depart east within 30 minutes. He did not say where east ended. San Bernardino, Riverside, beyond? It didn't matter. The idea of east was enough. He also said the train would prioritize medical evacuees, families with small children, and those with critical roles in public safety and infrastructure. The last part made sense. Even in collapse, you need people who can keep the water running and the lights lit where they still can be lit. It meant not all of us would get on. I am not ashamed to say that I wanted to get on. I am not proud to say I planned how to make sure the mother and her son did. Officer Martinez stood and walked to the table with the clipboards. She spoke to the woman there, then to a man in a transit uniform with a badge that said Operations. She pointed once at our group, once at the gate, and once at the city beyond the station. The woman with the clipboard nodded. It took me a second to process what I was seeing. Then Officer Martinez returned with a numbered stub in her hand. "They have room for 15 more on the first train," she said. "Medical and families first. After that, law enforcement and essential personnel. We count as essential because we can help keep things calm on the platform." We arranged ourselves according to the priorities we were given, not according to friendship or who had carried what. Erica and Jay went in the family group. The injured from other groups moved ahead. The paramedics guided 2 people on stretchers toward the train platform. The transit staff divided the rest of us into subgroups of 10 and walked us down the ramp in a controlled line. I carried Jay's extra water and handed it back to him when we reached the platform. He nodded at me in a way that said, "Thank you," and in a way that said he knew this felt like the end of a level in a game, and that the next level was not necessarily easier. The train was not full. The rumors had overpromised the crowd. There were enough people to fill a handful of cars with space between passengers. We could hear a broadcast on a handheld radio that someone had propped near a window. It said the word no one had said clearly yet. It said it without sensationalism, wrapped in instructions and cautions. It said it 3 times and then moved on to route closures and shelter locations. We were not the only ones who had approached from the river. A group came onto the platform from the far end, 2 of them limping, one clutching a broken umbrella like a staff. When they saw the train, one of them started toward the nearest door too fast. The sheriff's deputy stepped into his path, palm out, and the person stopped. Words were exchanged. The person nodded and moved to the end of the line. The deputy relaxed the set of his shoulders and dropped the muzzle of his rifle half an inch. Little things like that are how you keep crowds from becoming a problem. A station staffer walked the length of the platform, reminding people that the train would go to a temporary staging point east and then return. He did not promise it would return fast. He said those words in a slow voice that matched the pace of the train engines idling. He said the restroom on board would be for medical cases first. He said the water on board was limited. He said to keep noise down so instructions could be heard. He did not say we were safe. He said we had a ride. When the doors opened, the platform breathed as if it were one person. We shuffled forward. A conductor checked the stubs and the clipboards. He looked tired and firm and grateful to be able to do his job in a way that still mattered. He waved Erica and Jay through and tapped me on the shoulder to hold a second. He looked past me at Officer Martinez and Officer Hill. He counted out loud, 2 more seats. He looked back at me and shook his head a fraction. It wasn't personal. It was numbers on a page and bodies on a train. I stepped back without making a scene. I will not pretend it was noble. It was the only move that would keep the train from wasting a minute. Marco put a hand on my shoulder and squeezed once. "We'll get the next," he said, in a voice that made it sound like a statement, not a hope. Cass and Mana stood behind us. Nate, the cyclist, looked like he wanted to argue the seating chart with math, then saw the conductor's face and let it go. The doors closed with a sound I will always remember. The train pulled forward slow and then faster. It glided out of the station and into the dark east. The plaza quieted. The sheriff's deputy called over to us. "Next train in approximately 45 minutes, he said. He may have been making a guess. He may have had a radio update. It didn't matter. We had time to think. We had time to decide whether to stay in the plaza and hope for a seat on the next train, or to find a different route to a shelter that might be closer. Officer Martinez checked with operations and came back with a reality check. Trains would keep running as long as they could, but tracks could be blocked, crews could be delayed, and power at switching stations could fail without warning. If we had a place to sleep indoors nearby, that might be safer than betting on the second train. If we had no place to go, then staying in the station was sensible because that's where information and help would continue to arrive first. I thought about my apartment in North Hollywood, which might as well have been in another state for all the good it did me right then. I thought about the van, stuck on the 405 with the keys in my pocket and cargo in the back that no one would miss for a few days. I thought about the people who were not at the station, the ones we had left on the freeway shoulder. You can't carry everyone with you. You're not built to hold every story in real time. You hold what you can, and you don't let go of the people immediately next to you. We decided to split smart, not split apart. Officer Hill and two of the newcomers who lived near Boyle Heights would wait for the train. Officer Martinez would lead the rest of us: Marco, Cass, Mina, Nate, Raul, Harold, and Dinas, to a municipal building a few blocks away that had been opened as a temporary shelter with cots and a generator. She had the location from the operations staffer. We promised to regroup the next morning at the station if the trains were still running. We did not shake hands. We just looked at each other and nodded, because eye contact carries the weight that handshakes used to carry before this day. We moved out through the eastern gate of the station and onto a side street lined with low buildings and streetlights that were still lit. The light revealed streets scattered with things people drop when they run: a single shoe, a backpack with school notebooks spilling out, a plastic shopping bag with oranges rolling in it. We kept to the middle of the street when we could because doorways and alleys are where surprises live. A block ahead, we saw a small group moving against us. We did our practice thing: stop, form a line with space, hands visible, quiet. The group saw us and mirrored the posture. The two fronts passed each other with the caution people use near cliffs. The municipal building was a single-story structure with a flat roof and a courtyard fence. A generator hummed in the rear. A security guard with a radio and a baton stood at the gate. Inside, cots were lined in rows. A volunteer handed out blankets and pointed at a table with a sign that said, "Check in here." They asked names, phone numbers, emergency contacts. They asked if anyone had allergies or required medication. They asked if anyone had symptoms. They used the word symptom, which is one of those words that has a comma in it because it belongs to nurses and clinics and paperwork. The comma made me want to believe that the panic outside was temporary. I knew better, but believing something for a few minutes can win you a night of sleep. We got cots near the back wall. Raul took the one closest to the door because he said he slept light and would hear if anyone came in fast. Marco wrapped his jacket around his shoes and slid them under the cot. Habit from job sites where leaving your boots out meant finding them gone in the morning. I tucked my flashlight under my pillow and clipped the carabiner to the cot frame so if I had to move in the dark, I wouldn't lose it. Cass set a phone alarm for 5:30 a.m., even though we weren't sure alarms meant anything anymore. Mina wrote down a list of everything we needed to do at first light. Find battery packs, fill bottles, eat something with salt, check on the station, find a way to contact family. Sleep came in slices. Every 20 minutes a helicopter or a siren or a shout would slice it, and you would lie awake and listen to breath sounds in the room and count them like counting waves. At some point, I heard a broadcast coming from a portable radio near the volunteer desk. It listed places to avoid and places to go. It said certain parts of the city were under evacuation orders and others under shelter in place. It said resources would be distributed tomorrow morning at specific points. It used the phrase, "until further notice," 3 times. At 3:17 a.m., someone knocked at the gate. The security guard spoke through the metal. The someone said a name that meant nothing to me. The guard opened the gate a fraction. 2 people came in wearing hospital scrubs and masks around their necks. They looked around and saw the cots and the generator and started to cry without sound. A volunteer gave them water and pointed at the last 2 cots. They sat on them and curled around the water bottles like they were hot mugs in winter. I do not remember falling back asleep after that. I remember the clock on the wall turning to 4:02 a.m., and then 4:38 a.m., and then 5:11 a.m. The sky outside went from black to a gray that felt like a hallway between nights. We rose before the alarm. We moved quietly. We put the blankets in a bin and stacked our cots as requested, because following instructions in a place that offers you safety is the least you can do. We checked in with the volunteer to see if there were updates. There were. The trains would continue to run on a limited schedule based on track availability and crew rest. The city would set up water distribution points at noon near major intersections. The power company hoped to restore service to certain corridors by evening. The word hope did not belong to a corporation before. It belonged to us. Now, it belonged to everyone. We returned to Union Station by the same side streets because the river, which had been our friend at night, felt exposed in the dawn. The station staff had slept as little as we had. They looked like people running a marathon at mile 21. The second train had come and gone around 1 a.m., carrying more families and medical evacuees and a set of critical workers in uniforms that looked like transit and water department and communications. Officer Hill was gone. He had made that train. He had left a note with a volunteer that said he would radio for us if he reached the staging area, and there was space later in the day. The third train was due at 8:30 a.m. if all went well. That gave us time to make ourselves useful. We offered to help with line management. We carried cases of water bottles from a supply pallet to the distribution table. We helped a man with a cane get from the curb to a bench. We wrote information from a garbled radio call on a whiteboard for people to read as they entered. Shelter addresses, clinic locations, what to do if you found a person who was disoriented and aggressive but not yet a danger to others. We did not use words that would frighten children standing nearby. I left the station once with Marco to find a convenience store that might still be open, or at least not stripped bare. We kept to main streets and avoided working alleys. We found a corner market with a door open and a hand-lettered sign that said, 2 bottles per person. Leave money in jar. We left cash because seeing money in the jar would make the next person feel like they were part of an agreement. We took 2 bottles of sports drink with electrolytes, a small jar of peanut butter, a box of crackers, and a pack of wet wipes. When we came back past the same corner 2 hours later, the jar still had money in it, more than we had left. Somebody was keeping a fragile thread of normal commerce alive. At 8:26 a.m., the horn sounded again, and the platform filled. The announcements were the same, the priorities the same. We got split again by necessity. Cass and Mina were waved onto the third train. They squeezed my arm as they passed, and I told them to look for Hill at the staging area and to tell him we would keep coming as long as the trains kept coming. Marco and I stayed back with Officer Martinez, Nate, and Raul. The reason this time was simple. The train's available seats were fewer. We did not carry badges that moved us forward. We carried the work that remained behind. I do not know if anyone reading this expects a neat ending at this point. There was no neat ending. There was the slow, grinding work of holding a city together at its edges and finding ways to move people through those edges without letting the edges rip more than they already had. There was the second day and the third, and there were new fires and new closures and new announcements that replaced yesterday's announcements. We made a routine and then replaced it and then made a new one. We learned the rhythms of the station like it was a living thing. When the water ran low, when the volunteers changed shifts, when the radios got the clearest signals from the Emergency Operations Center downtown. In the late afternoon of the second day, I stood with Officer Martinez at the edge of the Los Angeles River again. We had escorted a group from a temporary shelter near Chinatown back to the station after a rumor said the shelter's generator might fail that night. The river was the quickest path that avoided the tightest choke points. The sky was a dull orange shield. My clothes smelled like smoke and cleaner and the diesel of the generator that kept the shelter lights on. Officer Martinez tapped my shoulder and pointed up the channel. I followed her finger. The freeways that arched across the river were still. Thousands of cars were locked in place on the high decks like pieces on a board no one could move. Some had their hoods up. Some had doors open. Some were just there, perfect and unremarkable in every way except for their frozen lines. In the orange light, the headlights on the cars that still had battery charge made small jewel points. They stretched for miles in each direction, a constellation too close to the ground. On the wind, from a long way off, came a faint chorus of voices that were not words. We stood and listened long enough to understand that the city would not clear itself. We would have to make paths. I looked at the lines of headlights and thought about how many mornings I had cursed those lights for being in my way. I thought about how many times I had said traffic like it was weather. I thought about the people in those cars and the lives stacked behind each windshield. I said the thing that came to mind, the only thing that felt like it fit into a sentence. Everyone thought the traffic would end them one day, I said. No one guessed it would be like this. Officer Martinez nodded once and lifted the strap of her radio higher on her shoulder. "Let's move," she said. "We've got another group to bring in before dark." And we did. And the day did not end just because the sun went down. It ended because we kept going, and the next day started the same way. We sketched the plan for the next 24 hours on a clipboard. 2 escorts from the shelter at the municipal building, 1 supply run to the corner market if it was still operating on the jar system, 1 check-in with the operations desk about train schedules, 1 walk along the river to mark safe passages with the bright surveyor's tape we had taken from the maintenance yard so other groups could follow. It wasn't much against a county this large. It was what we could do with the people we had. When night fell again, the river's long concrete stripe held the glow of the city the way a screen holds an image after you close your eyes. The headlight constellations on the freeways stayed in place, like tombstones for a version of life that would not return on its own. We learned to travel between them, below them, alongside them, building routes with tape and chalk and repeat trips until the routes felt like muscle memory for everyone we led. On the 3rd morning, a new broadcast said National Guard units were reinforcing key intersections, and that a larger evacuation effort would begin from Union Station by the afternoon if the tracks to the east could be cleared. We knew what that meant. It meant more lines, more clipboards, more careful sorting of who went first. It also meant the river would be busier, with more people walking along it at once. We made signs from cardboard with arrows and the word "station" in large block letters. We taped them to the undersides of bridges, places only a person on foot would see. We added "quiet route" in small letters because sound still drew the wrong attention at the wrong moments. In a week, the city would look different again. Some neighborhoods would be stable behind their own barricades. Others would be empty of residents and full of noise. The freeways would still be stacked with cars and sections, but crews would begin to clear them, slowly, with tow trucks and bulldozers and crews that could work under escort. In a month, the story I am telling would become only the first chapter of a longer account of how people adapted to a map that had lost its ordinary meaning. But in those first days, the Los Angeles River was our road, and Union Station was our anchor, and the plan we made alongside the water and the tracks was simple and strict. Move in silence when possible. Mark the safe paths for others. Carry what you can carry. Give what you can give without breaking the people who give. and always look once more before you step out from under an overpass. We learned to cut across yards where dogs would have barked in normal times and didn't now because their owners had brought them inside. We learned the wind patterns at the corners of buildings so we could tell if smoke would roll into a stairwell. We learned that a reflective vest and a calm voice could still do work when nothing else felt strong enough. On the fifth night, after we had sent another train east loaded with families and elders, and a handful of workers with tool belts and clipboards, I walked to the edge of the plaza and looked toward the river. The glow along the horizon looked like 1,000 campfires. The city that had once told me, through its screens and billboards and schedules, to move faster and buy more and fill every minute with something, had simplified itself down to a few rules and a few commitments we would keep because the people next to us needed us to keep them. It wasn't heroic. It was practical. I still had the van keys in my pocket. I twisted them in my hand like a worry token. Someday, I would go back to where the van sat between a ladder truck and a sedan. Someday, the freeways would no longer be a wall. Someday, the maintenance catwalk we had used like a secret bridge would be just a maintenance catwalk again. That day would not be soon. Until then, the river and the rails and the lines of people holding onto each other would be the way out and the way forward. The station loudspeaker, which had been silent for most of the day, clicked and popped. A voice announced that the next train would be ready to board at 9:15 p.m. for points east. It asked families with infants to form the first line. It asked for patience. It said thank you in a tone that made the thank you feel like an agreement rather than an apology. Officer Martinez walked past me with a clipboard and a pen and handed me a roll of tape. "New line markers," she said. "Same plan." I took the tape and nodded. The night was young. The city was old. We had work to do. And down in the concrete channel the water kept moving, too slow to notice unless you watched it for a long time, steady enough that if you followed it, it would lead you out. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.